Hello, and welcome to Right to Be Wrong, the show that revives the art of conversation, accommodating varied views on sports, culture, politics, world events, and every topic under the sun. After all, you have a right to be wrong. Here are your hosts, Dave and Tony.
Well, Tone, as everyone will be able to see, we're getting pretty fancy. We're now on video, and unfortunately, as much as our team is fantastic at setting us up, lining everything up, sound is great, we both still look like crap. How have you been, my friend?
Speak for yourself, Dave.
It is true.
I was made for this.
You woke up this morning, you pissed excellence.
No one puts Tony in a studio in Parramatta Library.
Oh, no, you're moving up in the world, Tone.
I know.
Look at it. This is what happens when you actually got one person that's quite highly qualified and the other one just hanging on his coattails.
Which one's which, Dave? Talk to me.
I'm hanging on your coattails, Tone. You're the one with the C in front of his title.
What problem of the world are we solving, discussing? What are you going to educate me on tonight?
Well, I'm going to try and educate you and everyone else on the realities of what was highlighted in the GFC. So, in other words, the privatization of profits and the socialization of losses. So, unfortunately, what we start to see is we get a lot of collapsed businesses in the modern world that, depending on your size, whether or not the government will step in and save you. And by government, that means will they use our money? And they do.
Talk to me, Dave. It sounds very socialist of you.
Well, I don't want to socialize the losses. That's the problem. So, as you know, I'm a free market capitalist guy, not a socialist at all. Notwithstanding that I do believe in some things like universal healthcare, universal education, I'd throw in free public transport. But aside from that, I'm a free market guy. And I don't like the idea that when we get something a la the GFC, that we start talking about too big to fail and that the taxpayer wears the losses for what's been going on in the private sector.
But why is that allowed to happen? I find that the pro-business lobby in general, large, medium, small, will always say, let the market decide, let the market do what the market does, government get out of the way, only until the point when it starts hurting their profits or they're not getting enough of a handout, and then all of a sudden they don't want the free market, they like the socialist handout. You can't have it both ways.
Exactly, and that's my issue. It's that if you're going to pay big bonuses, you're going to take the chances, you're going to do everything. If a business collapses, it collapses. We don't turn around and if the local cafe goes under, we don't lobby the government for money to keep them going. If the barbershop goes under, we don't lobby them for money. So I don't see why if you're a big financial institution, insurer, whatever it may be, that the taxpayer's got to wear the losses for what you've got wrong. The issue is when that term that they say, too big to fail. Well, there's two things. I think the first thing is the term I heard was too big to jail, and I think there's more truth to that some of the people and what's going on in the corporate world, that if you did that, for example, if you went in and robbed a bank and you stole $1,000, you'd be put in prison. But if you steal $100 million, you're not going to prison. So I think the first thing is it's more too big to jail. But the second part is the question arises, should we allow institutions to get that big that we have that systemic risk that if something goes wrong, that the taxpayers have to bail them out?
So let's look at let's focus in on banks and let's focus on Australia and then the US. So with Australia, 4 big banks, I could say that the market has allowed CBA, ANZ, Westpac and NAB to dominate. The market has spoken. Consumers have said we like what they offer from a price perspective, services, blah, blah, blah. And we've allowed them to grow and dominate to the point where CBA is so dominant in the home banking retail space that it's been the market has driven it to that point. There's been nothing that the government has done or hasn't done that could have stopped CBA from where it is now. Now, some people might say, well, then they should open up. They should open up the banking sector and allow more foreign banks to come in and take deposits and run a mortgage book and sell credit cards. And that's all well and good. But how comfortable are we in Australia if a foreign bank came in with a big balance sheet and started writing really cheap mortgages and everyone's going, how good is this? They're undercutting CBA by 50 basis points and they're giving us good rates on their term deposits. And then head office in whoop whoop of that big multinational bank decides to go, we got a liquidity issue in the US. We're going to pull some deposit funds out of Australia to go and support the US. So my point is, banks are too big to fail, but there's nothing that the government could have done to either stop that in Australia. Because if you open up the sector, there are offsetting problems that occur as well when more competitors come in looking to squeeze margin, push more product, and take those products to the edge, which led us to the GFC. So I actually think we're well positioned in Australia to make sure that our banks are well regulated, they've got sufficient levels of capital, and there is some level of moral hazard to stop them from doing stupid stuff. Because I all think they believe, especially those big four banks, they all believe that they can make a sufficient return to keep their shareholders happy. Whereas in the US, I think it's much more competitive and banks are more likely to get into some funky stuff to drive earnings and to grow their balance sheet, which leads to things like the GFC. And that's when those economy-wide shocks need to be bailed out by the government.
Well, the four pillars policy was certainly something that at the time of the GFC was a safety net. I don't necessarily want to completely open up the market to banks from all around the world, but we do have a bit of a problem in Australia. I know our market's much smaller. Obviously, we're talking 27 million, give or take, not all of age to have a mortgage or debt, as opposed to the US at the 350 plus, depending on how many illegals the Biden administration's let in. But I also think that we have the banking finance sector has the same problem that we have in things like our airlines, our supermarkets. We do have a little bit of an overprotection of certain sectors and certain industries. I think we do need to do one of two things. I think we need to start opening up more to competition. That doesn't have to be a complete free-for-all where we risk what you said. Or if we're going to maintain what we're doing is when we get scandals, like where we had a Royal Commission into banking and we've had loans written for people that were too old to understand what they were signing, in other words, lacking informed consent, or, documents that are fake to push things through, that we do start holding people accountable. So that means I want to start seeing whoever was the head of whatever department that knew things were rotten, that they're going to prison. I'm getting a bit sick of what I see as a soft on white collar crime situation. This is not isolated to Australia. This is something that happens all in the developed world. We seem to think that white collar crime has sort of less impact on the victims, or no victims in some way, where in fact it actually has more, because you'd think what transpired that led to the GFC had a greater impact on hundreds of millions of people around the world, as opposed to, someone going in and holding up a bank with that gun that's traumatized the girl behind the counter and everyone that happened to be there at the time. So I'd like to see some more accountability, but the other aspect is it's not even just that. To me, it's a little bit deeper. So, for example, in Australia, in Sydney, we have more toll roads than any other city in the world. So even though at the moment we're not seeing, say, Transurban or the Singaporean venture capitalists, going broke or at risk of going broke, so we don't have a situation where the taxpayer's bailing them out for failure, but we're at the situation where the taxpayer is paying such exorbitant fees on the infrastructure that we require that at some point we still need to look at everything before it even fails.
So specifically on that point, Dave, at the time that these public-private partnerships were struck to deliver infrastructure like roads around Sydney, what was the alternative for government? You got one or two choices. Get into bed with private and then sign up to an arrangement that sounds like you'll be able to generate revenue off tolls, capped or uncapped, for a period of 30 years, and then something else is going to happen, then it gets handed back to the taxpayer, whatever it might be, some type of financial arrangement. If that doesn't happen and they don't get private investment to help build and maintain that toll road, the option is, okay, dip into Treasury and then let's get into a bigger deficit.
Now, there are two. This is where I'm going into my ideas here, right? So a little bit different in terms of, no, here's where I disagree and here's what's wrong, here's what's right.
See, now people can not only hear you,
they can now
see the brilliance.
They can see the brilliance.
Look at it.
The brain at work. But I think we have such a large superannuation scheme going on, and I know that some of these partnerships go back 20 or 30 years, and that's only about the time that superannuation becomes a thing in the early 90s anyway. But I think we're at the point where, spitballing a few ideas, I wonder whether we could start to legislate that a certain percentage of everyone's superannuation must be invested in Australian infrastructure projects. So, for example, let's call 10% of all superannuation. And what we start to do on that is we say there's a fixed return. So instead of in the market where if you have a good year, there's 12%, a bad year might be 1% or a negative, that what we do is we know that these are going to be toll roads. We don't want to see them getting to the point where people are spending $100 a week on tolls, but we need to invest in it and we need return. So you might say that 10% of your superannuation invested in Australia stays in Australia, it's into the infrastructure, but it's a fixed 5%. So what you then start to do is, well, the running costs plus 5% on that toll road or whatever it might be. So I think that's number one. The other thing for me that I don't like, again, which is getting back to the socialised aspect. So again, socialising the cost but privatising the profits, is using those toll roads. They build things 2 lanes each way when they knew from the get-go they needed 4 or 5 lanes each way. But they'll often be happy to do that because at construction, the completion of construction, they're able to then say, we all know we need to widen this road. We'll do it for you, but we now need an extension on the concession of the exclusivity over the toll road. So that being, as you said, we signed up a public-private partnership. We give them 30 years for return. From day one, it's obsolete. We turn around and we start the extension or the widening or whatever we're doing, and then we give them another 30 years. So suddenly what we're doing is giving you a 60-year concession over something. The profits are all going to you, and we're all wearing the cost in terms of not only the direct out-of-pocket expense, because it now costs us it's costing you more. Instead of at construction doing 4 or 5 lanes, it's costing you more to do 2 lots of 2 or 2 lots of 3. So we pay more because you've now got to put the tolls up higher, and we pay more through our loss of time because it's now 50 years and I'm buried before the piece of infrastructure that we required is actually now at capacity to deal with what it was meant to from inception.
So what you're telling me, Dave, is that toll road you speak of in 60 years' time, taxpayers will have ownership of that toll road well after we get our first submarines under the AUKUS arrangement.
Maybe we could drive the submarines down the toll road.
That's creative, Dave.
It is very creative, but it reminds me a little bit of Family Guy when Peter and Quagmire. Peter and Quagmire start a band and they do this song, train on the water, boat on the tracks.
It's going to happen.
That way, of course it could happen.
If we turn a little bit closer to home then, because this is beyond just big infrastructure or large financial institutions. Even recently, there was a privately owned new hospital. I think it's about less than 5 years old on the Northern Beaches.
I'm glad you mentioned hospital because I got a story coming up with that too.
Because that had been run privately. I honestly forget the name of the group that actually ran that. And now, because it's all gone to shit, there was a tragic death of a young child that was misdiagnosed. And now they're basically saying the government needs to step in and just take over the hospital and the private operator effectively gets out. So again, I think this is one of those areas where you quite rightly point out, and you've mentioned it on a number of occasions.
Can you just go back and say again that I quite rightly did something? Because that's the essence of this podcast. That's my mission, is to make sure you know I'm always right.
That's right, not always. You have mentioned that...
I do have a right to be wrong.
That's right. There are some services that need to be delivered by the government, because there's guardrails in place, protections in place, and there's an expectation that the level of service will be there. And there are others you can give out the free market. So that's a classic where someone's failed horribly, and now the government's forced to step in.
But we've got to be careful too, because this is a whole separate episode that I want to do, which is on emotional decision making. Because
I'm a peacock captain.
I've got to let you fly, Tone.
That's right.
You don't want a situation, well, 2 things. The first thing is the worst decisions you ever make are emotional ones, right? We know that individually, but we seem to accept it collectively. So using that example, you don't want to be the parent of that child that died. It's terrible. But do you want an emotional decision made off the back of that that's not the best thing either, because there's an assumption in that because this has taken place in a private hospital, that wouldn't have taken place in a public hospital. Human nature and errors are always going to happen, whether it's public or private. So I don't want an overcorrection based on those emotions. But what I don't want to see, again, as I mentioned, you mentioned hospitals, being the fat middle-aged guy that I am that everyone can now see, I had to go for an angiogram a couple of weeks back. So when we're at the hospital, the parking was like $25 for 3 hours. When I left, I said to the Mauritian Queen, I said, this is insane. I said, if you're here, you're either working in the hospital, you're in the hospital, you're going for diagnostic services, you're taking someone for diagnostic services, or you're visiting someone in hospital. And we've decided as a society that at a time where those serious things are going on in terms of your health, that's the time that we'll maximize profit on parking. And to me, that's kind of a symbol of how far we've fallen as a society, that we can't even turn around and provide free parking to your family to visit you in hospital. It's insane. So this is another situation where when I say privatizing profits, socializing losses, there's a privatization of the profit in that car park, and the loss is not the direct loss out of pocket for the people that are there and having to park there. It's the loss that at a time that you could be, 10% of people are in that hospital, you're basically on the start of the grieving process because they're at end of life, and you're having to fork out. Like it's just insane. So it's a through line that's more than just the direct dollars, that it comes about from everything we've maximized that, profit. And it gets to my point when I've mentioned before about, because every time we hear our leaders talk about things, they talk about us as consumers. We talk about GDP. We talk about the economy. Now, I'm no fool. I know life costs money. This is the reality. But at what point are we going to start to have a conversation about citizenship again? At what point are we going to talk about when's enough profit? How much is enough? Because another thing that goes on using these public-private partnerships, they're extremely profitable, but there's never enough. If they can turn their 9% annual return into 10, they will. And if it can be 11 and 12 and so on and so forth. So I think there's a conversation that needs to be had at the leadership level. It shouldn't even need rebellion. It shouldn't even need people calling talkback radio, which is that still a thing? I don't know. Podcasts are the thing now. But you shouldn't have people having to whinge and complain about what's going on, because this should be something that's clearly identifiable at the leadership level, and they should already be discussing policies to try and address it to get us back towards, living rather than existing.
There's a whole discussion here, Dave, around one side of politics always bangs on about being the more business-focused, with the greater ability to manage the economy, drive GDP, lower unemployment, better outcomes for business, more people employed, more people working, more people paying taxes. And that's typically the right, the conservatives. And then the other side, on the left, the moderate lefts, are more around making sure that the government can provide all the services it needs to provide and no one gets left behind. There's a clear demarcation there. And I think some of this discussion around the privatising of profits lends itself into the policies that are implemented by the right, and the socialising of losses is just a byproduct. If it's going to happen, someone needs to pick up the bill and get on with it. So in a classic example, so we've touched on the GFC and what happened there. If we go back, what is it now, 5 years, the start of COVID, and then into the mid-2020 year, JobKeeper was announced, and JobKeeper, at a conceptual level, made sense, right? But became bigger than Ben-Hur, and then the rorts off the back of it led to massive blowouts in government debt and deficit in order to fund it. JobKeeper, in its essence, I think was a good idea, but it was completely mismanaged to the point where I actually think it propped up a lot of businesses that should have gone to the wall.
Oh, without doubt. But the thing I'd say to that, though, is it was a nominally good idea amongst a very bad idea in how we dealt with COVID. Because there's, this is a whole episode I'd like to do on what I call a COVID crescendo, because to me there's a question mark around how we got to the point where everyone looked to mummy and daddy government to make all the decisions. I think some point.
Can we sing that episode?
Can we sing the
COVID crescendo?
Of course we can. Away you go, Tony.
Looking
How good
for-
you singing?
I'm
How
looking
good your
forward to it.
singing voice?
Not too bad at all.
I still got to find out if you can even do impersonations, because if we're going to continue doing videos, I want to see some impersonations from you.
Before the end of this podcast tonight, you're going to drop us with a bit of a Donny, aren't you?
I can do a Donny, I can do a Churchill, I can do an Albo. What do you want? But anyway, well, I digress. But that's, for me, this is one of the problems, is that why does everyone look to the government to do everything? The one thing I'd like to change, and one thing I do like the Americans, the way in which they speak about their government, and not always, but their government's known as the administration. So it's the Trump administration, was the Biden administration, the Obama administration. That's the best way, to me, to look at your government. I know they're a government, but when you govern, and it's like rule by diktat, by fiat. And I think we need to move away from that, because what we start to do is we're empowering them too much, and we're disempowering ourselves. We think that they've got all the solutions, they've got all the answers, where people forget the money they have is not their money. The money they have is taken from us, put into a pool that is misused for the most part, and then whatever is left over that they haven't taken for themselves or misused is what gets fought over. So, you fight over that, whether it be for education, whether it be for health, whether it be for defense. But there's no magic, amount of money that's set aside separate that the government has. So every time we talk about, the government managing things, the government putting up guardrails, the government supporting and paying for, we need to get back to remembering who is that government. And that government is just a bunch of human beings that we've supposedly elected to administer the money that we've agreed that you can take off us for the work that we've performed for the greater good. Right? That's the concept. So that's why, for me, it's like, as a free market guy, you made a decision as, Bear Stearns, you made a decision as Lehman Brothers, you made a decision as Enron. I know I'm talking about the corporate as an entity, but the board, the CEOs, the CFOs, the C-suite, they made decisions. They didn't work out. Just like a bad decision in a restaurant, in a cafe, in a barbershop, they should have been left to collapse. And if you found there were people there that were breaking the Corporations Act, they were doing things criminally, they were trading insolvent, well, they should have been locked up. And that's, to me, where the essence of the problem that we've got is there's zero accountability for those that are making decisions, that they've basically got no downside, right? Because there's not even downside if you get it wrong.
Oh, but Dave, there's a clear example of this now in the US, like that big beautiful bill, like adding trillions to the debt, right?
Which is
embedding.
I don't know where they're going to pay for this, because they're already 37 trillion in the hole.
Embedding tax cuts for the rich into legislation, but the old chestnut around no tax on tips has got an expiry date of 3 years. Like, it's just silly games, right?
Well, that's politicking 101, right? Because what that says is, let's assume it's JD. So you've got JD Vance, and he runs on, we will continue that if you elect us.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, but the politics is always going to be there.
Sadly.
So, and you say administration, it's one thing to administer, but power, self-interest takes over, and these people want to run your life.
Oh, without doubt.
More so in the US than here.
I actually think it's a Western problem. I think we've moved more towards totalitarianism in various at various levels in various countries, but I think we're starting to see things that once upon a time we used to point fingers at in the third world. I think that we do have people that think they're, as Tony Abbott would say, the suppository of all knowledge, but being the repository of all knowledge.
Here we are in a beautiful studio being taped.
And I had to bring up Tony Abbott.
And you have to bring in the onion eater.
The suppository.
What a dick.
Are you imagining him and his budgie smugglers right now on the beach? Did I tell you he had the office when I was working for Aramco? Yeah, his office was next door.
Yeah.
John Howard was on the 56th floor and Tony Abbott was next door. Funnily enough, Tony Abbott, literally the office next door. I never saw him once, right? I'd see his staff go in and out. So I never saw him once, even though us taxpayers are paying for this office. I used to run into John Howard all the time. He's a glorified garden gnome. I never realized how short he actually was until one day I'd said to my colleague, just talking about the difference, my Saudi colleague, talking about the difference between what you can and can't say about your leader. And I said, one of the things I love about being Australian is you could walk up to the Prime Minister and say, F you. I said, I don't think it's the right way to deal with things, but I love the fact that we have the freedom that you can. I said, in Saudi Arabia, can you imagine going up and saying that to the king? And anyway, literally about an hour later, we're going for lunch. We go downstairs, the elevators open up, and there's John Howard and his minder. And I said, oh, good afternoon, Mr. Howard. Oh, you? And keeps walking. And she says to me, oh, who was that? Do you know him? I said, no, that's what I'm talking about. That was our second longest serving Prime Minister. And she's like, where's his bodyguards? I'm like, it's Australia. It's too much effort to kill someone.
We're chilled out here.
Yeah.
Chilled out.
It's easier to say F you than it is to shoot someone.
So if we take
you don't have to crawl onto a roof.
That's right. It's in
Just
Butler,
yell it out.
Pennsylvania.
It's been a year.
Yeah, has it?
Yeah. How fast has that gone?
I know.
They memory hold that.
He's doing well over there, isn't he, Dave? We probably should get back to that at some point. Let's revisit the Trump agenda and see how he's going.
Well, that's what I want to do. I want to do a couple of things on where he's at.
Yeah.
He's doing good, Tone. He's doing very good. The big, beautiful bill. It's huge.
Did you see him overnight on stage? He awarded Chelsea won the Club World Championship, and Donny was supposed to give him the trophy, then rack off. Not our Don. Our Donny's up there for the celebrations.
Of course he is.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. It's all about the big Don.
So I want to pivot, Dave.
There's that corporate speak again, too.
I'm going to pivot.
You're going to pivot. Take me on the journey, Tone.
Dave, can we pick that up at another time?
Of course.
We're going to circle back on that.
Back.
Yeah. I've got this issue that kind of sticks in my drawer around small business. And
how they don't make enough money.
No, I actually think I might be a little bit harsh here. That's why I want your lens, because you are a small business owner.
I am a small technically so are you, Tone, as you own part of the Right to Be Wrong
podcast. Oh, this is true.
So
this is true.
You're moving up in the world.
I think at times governments bend
You were just a rich bean counter before. Now you're a struggling small business owner.
And a rich bean counter.
Welcome to the world.
I think governments tend to bend themselves over backwards. And there's always a rhetoric and a narrative at election time around supporting small businesses. Small businesses are so important. They're the lifeblood of employment. They're the lifeblood of the economy. And I get all that. But I just sense that at times there's a little bit too much give, because politically it's a landmine. And if you're not seen to support small businesses, then you get turfed on your ass, or the electorate will take care of you. But some of the policies that they've got in place, like the instant tax write-off, some other subsidies that small businesses get, I just think to myself, if you can't make a sufficient return in a small business in a competitive marketplace, well, then how much should the government be giving you to help prop you up?
Well, the short answer is, getting back to my position, the government really shouldn't be giving you anything, right?
But the expectation is that they do, Dave.
Well, the expectation is there, but the irony is, I can tell you that, and knowing a lot of small business owners, and as you said, being one, there's very little that small businesses actually get from that. Because when you start talking about instant tax write-offs and you get this, that, the other, it's really a small to medium enterprise. So what you're really talking about is normally someone that might have 15 to 20 staff up to, say, 100 to 200. Now, that would still be, close to defined as a small business on our metrics. But if you're doing that well, that you sort of got 15 staff and up, generally you're okay. So to me, when I think of all the mum and dad type stores, the sole trader type stores, the government can do whatever it wants, but you generally don't have, 40, 50, 60 grand that you could spend on plant equipment and write it off straight away. It doesn't tend to happen. So I think politicians play on the small business aspect as if it is, I'm helping the mum and dad, but that's not really where it ends up. It's a more medium-sized enterprise that tends to get things, but they're not obviously BHP, Billiton, and the larger people.
But all I'd say there is, is there some form of protectionism in place that really shouldn't be there?
Look, definitely, because I think if you spoke to most small business owners, genuine small business owners, so let's call that anyone with 50 staff and less. So you might be working something on your own. You might be lucky enough to have 50 staff. But generally, the best thing government could do is actually get out of the way. Less red tape, less costs. We don't need the write-offs. We don't need this, that, and the other. We don't need the other onerous cost of doing things that they put in place. That's probably more where the issues are. And certainly, what's payroll tax? Is it based on number of employees? I've never been big enough.
No.
Or is it turnover?
Turnover, yeah.
What's the turnover?
Oh, it's quite high actually. In New South Wales, I think it's like up to 10 million. It's actually quite a big number.
Yeah, well, getting to that would be the same people that are benefiting from all these direct
That's right.
write-offs.
You're looking
It
at
really
about
doesn't help small
100,
business.
150 employees.
Even though I completely disagree with the concept of payroll tax. To me, the very fact that you've created work for all those people are paying income tax and everything else, the GST that drives through your business, I think at some point we've got to say, thank you for creating employment. Now, I know I don't want market distortion. I don't want someone to get big enough that that they can start to manipulate the market. But I do think we have a tax system that's a little bit nonsensical when you think to yourself, the fact that your business is successful and you've got more staff and you pay more wages, we're going to tax you for paying wages. Like that's an insane concept.
I get it. I'm kind of probing on this government intervention. So government intervention, because the more government gets involved,
the more things go awry.
That's right. But then the greater the expectation is the government's going to step in when it goes pear-shaped and bail everyone out.
Which I really hate.
That's
I hate
right.
the concept that we've raised people to be at the point where they think the government is the superhero. If you go back just 100 years, you go back to the Depression, and there's a lot of evidence that it really wasn't handled well, and in some ways it made it, some of the policies made it worse. But at the end of the day, it was about you had to look after yourself, right? The government wasn't there to make sure you had jobs per se, or the type of job you had and all that stuff. Now, I'm not advocating a return to that either, because I know that, people working 1,000 hours in terrible conditions and building infrastructure like the Harbour Bridge and, 10 people a day fall off it type stuff. But there's also, we've sort of thrown the baby out with the bathwater, that we've gone from where we wanted the guardrails, we wanted better conditions, we wanted protections for the worker and all this sort of thing. But then we got to the point where there's an over-reliance. So it's gone from, you have a child, you put the shoes on their feet when they're a baby, you keep them warm, but at some point you let your kids walk barefoot because it toughens up the skin. And if you put them in shoes and socks all the time and they get to 20 years of age and they walk across grass for the first time, one bindi is going to make it feel like a needle's being driven through their foot. So at some point we need society to be a little bit tough to stop turning to the government. The government's meant to be there, as I said, the guardrails, times of emergency. They're not really meant to be the mother and father to society.
So this is like an evolving discussion. We're about to go on a bit of a tangent, but we
do.
So this government intervention piece, because one thing I looked at today.
Can you write? Didn't you work with numbers?
Yes.
I thought you worked with numbers because you couldn't read and write.
I'm actually the guy from The Hangover. I'm actually a janitor at a high school.
Is your best friend Ben Affleck?
It is, yeah.
So.
On this government intervention piece, I got back to, in my own mind, housing. Housing's a classic where this is now a government problem. Young people cannot afford housing in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, wherever, and the government has to fix it.
This is one of the rare times that I actually think they should, because I think they created it.
Which is fine. So let's just pause there. I've got no problem with the government getting involved and fixing it. But then my concern is, should it go pear-shaped, then the government has to pony up as well. So if
it's never ending. It's a vicious circle.
Because once they're in, they're in. So they're going to roll out a policy, cheaper housing, higher density housing close to transport hubs, whatever it might be, quicker approvals, more incentives for developers. So
I don't think we need more incentives for developers.
But what I'm saying, Dave, is that's one of the levers they could pull. And then what happens there? Dodge Brothers 1, 2, and 3, who are the developers, build some shitty apartments, and who's bailing them out?
Correct, because that's what's happened, right? Because we've had the Mascot Tower and the Opal Tower, where we've built brand new apartment buildings, and within the first couple of years, we're evacuating people in the middle of the night because we're worried they're going to collapse. I mean, this sort of stuff shouldn't happen in a first world economy. Now,
but Dave, see, how does that happen? How do we get because there's lack of oversight, lack of regulation. So at one end of the spectrum, people say, get government out of the way, let business do what business does.
But
right?
that oversight and regulation is not because we need more. That's because some of the regulatory changes were a reversion. They were regression rather than progression. So, for example, private certification. So you turn around and you don't have an independent party that's certifying the quality of a project, and you don't see that that's always going to be open to manipulation. And then on top of that, there's a whole bunch of intertwined variables in this. One of the other problems is that we haven't created enough tradesmen, right? So you're paying through the nose. We offshored all our manufacturing base. So to import stuff now, especially post COVID, with supply chain issues and the like, those costs have gone up. So that sort of stuff is where, for me, when I said this is where I want the government to fix it, this is what I'd clarify. Government addressing issues shouldn't just be the government printing money, right? It shouldn't just be, okay, we're going to give you more money. We're going to turn around and you've got a first home buyer's grant. You've got a baby bonus,
But that's the expectation, Dave.
It is the expectation. That's something we've got to address. What it should be is, we've realised we have a migration problem. We've got a big Australia policy that we can't justify why we're doing it. We have to admit the numbers we've done, where we've grown from 8.5 million, from 19 million in the year 2000, another 8.5 million to 27.5 in 25 years. We've crush loaded the infrastructure. We haven't built enough housing. So we're going to revisit our policy that we want another 13.5 million people in the next 40. So what the government should be doing is it should be looking at things like migration. It should be looking at local council red tape. It should be looking at what can we manufacture onshore to reduce the cost of materials. It should be looking at how do we train up more tradespeople so we're not paying through the nose for tradespeople. So those sorts of regulatory things that the government has got wrong, it can address. But it doesn't always have to be, money printing and hand over dollars to people. Because, again, that's the same thing, right? Because when you mentioned incentivizing the developers, now I know some developers go broke, but often they go broke and they're a Phoenix company and they rise, and the individual themselves hasn't gone broke. The company has gone broke. So a lot of developers are very well off and they take a lot of risk. I'm not picking on them. But, again, this is another example of privatizing the profits and then socializing the losses. So the developer goes broke. Who's left holding the bag? Right? And the government's expected to step in. Where's the government get the money from? Out of our pockets.
That's right.
So this is where, if you're getting your regulation wrong, if you're getting your guardrails wrong, and you've raised a culture of expectation that the government is always there, people turn to the government in two ways. The first is automatically fix it or save me. And then that comes about from dollars. Right? Because it's a bit like if someone came to you and, what's the old saying? Give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him to fish, feed him for a lifetime. What we've got to do is start teaching people to fish. Or as I saw a good meme the other day, it was Trump that said, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, deport him, you'll never have to feed him again. So I thought that was good. But that's the problem. So when I talk about government intervention, I want government intervention for them to address their mistakes and take ownership of it, but don't just start printing more money, and don't continue the expectation that you finish university, you finish a trade, and the government's going to give you a deposit for a house. Because I mentioned it in one of our other episodes. I said, notwithstanding that in Sydney or Australia in general, average income to the price of a property is like 9, 10x. If that was 5x, so a reversion to the mean down at 3.5 to 5x, would our generation right now have the 20% deposit ready to go? The answer is still no. So we've still got some issues there that, yes, we've got the regulatory issues, but we still need some individual responsibility and accountability and change our culture in terms of two things. One is, what's our attitude towards business? If you're going to make profit and you're going to get things wrong and you're going to go broke, are we going to continue to support stepping in? And if so, what does stepping in look like? Because, again, let's use another example. Qantas with COVID. Now, I don't have any issue that it was the government of the day that shut down our borders and you couldn't fly anywhere, and that's nothing to do with Qantas. Even though Alan Joyce, to me, is the worst CEO this country's ever seen, and we'll do a whole episode on that, whole episode on failing up. But the problem is that when the government bailed them out, they should have said two things. Now, we know we have an obligation here because this is beyond your control and the decision that we have made. However, we're going to take a share in the business. So what will happen is we'll get the money back for the taxpayer, and we'll have a conversation in 5 years' time at what a buyback would look like for you to get those shares, and that the taxpayer that's prepared to help you is out of pocket in the interim because you're a private enterprise. But it didn't happen.
That's common sense. It should have happened.
I've got a lot of common sense too.
But let's continue to unpick this property piece, because there's regulatory issues or poor regulatory policies that have been put in place by government that lead to these adverse outcomes that make it difficult for people to buy houses and yada, yada, yada. But if I look at negative gearing, for example, and the policy, whether it's a good policy or
touch my negative gearing, Tony.
Whether it's a good policy or a bad policy, what happens, Dave, when, let's just say in 3 years' time, the shit does go down, right? And China
just reminded me of the what's that band? There's a rap band, YouTube. When the shit goes down, you better be ready. When the shit goes down.
So
what's the name of that band?
No idea. But when it does go down,
that's it. Cypress Hill. Well done.
So when it does go down,
I love having a producer's tone.
I think to myself, the impact that could cause to the property market. Let's just say property went down 30% in a year, right? Unemployment was at 10%, and I heard a separate podcast today around they were estimating or trying to work out what the unemployment rate would be as AI picks up speed, and one of them said 12, right? So let's just say unemployment's up, property market crashes, the bubble finally bursts. This whole stupid notion of property's always a safe bet, it's always going to go up in Sydney and Melbourne, whatever, they get hammered. What's the first thing that's going to happen?
They're going to cry to the government to save them.
So I borrowed money off a private bank, off a valuation at the time, based on my earning capacity, my serviceability, and my credit history. I did all of that, right? And the market's turned around and slapped you in the face, and now you want government to bail you out. And that's where we should say a hard no.
I agree, but my view is basically that's the same position on everything, because this is the same position I take with the commercial real estate, right? With the work from home and them crying poor. Now, again, as I laid out with Qantas, it was a government decision beyond their control. So there's a certain level there that I don't have any issue with some support. But there's also what we're starting to see is we're starting to create a class of people that think an investment, or not even a class, it's generally because you've just pointed out that it's happening with housing. So it's actually not a class, it's happening all the way through society. That what happens is when you invest, that there's a perception that an investment could only be positive. And that's not the case. Whether you start a barbershop, whether you buy a commercial property, whether you buy a house,
whether you invest in a podcast,
that's a bad investment. Do not do that. Do not do it unless you're really good in impersonations. But if you invest, there's a risk you could lose all your money. So the first rule of investment is don't invest money that you can't afford to lose. And then the second is diversify. So we get people that turn around and cry they're not getting a return, but when they're getting 12%, 15%, it doubles in 5 years. They don't turn around and go, wow, you know what? This has been a lot better than I thought. I want to give back to the taxpayer. I'll pay an extra 10% because I've had a windfall. We only hear it when things go right, and that's the problem, right? Again, that's socializing the losses. But I'm losing, so the government can step in with the taxpayer's dollar.
But Dave, you quoted earlier a story or an anecdote from Dave around back in pre-World War II. It was a different mindset. People didn't look to government to bail them out. Government kind of stayed out of the way. People understood they were going to cop a smack in the mouth every now and then.
You ate the damn rabbits.
Things got tough, right? So this is a cultural thing, and it's not individuals. It's collectively as a society. There's an expectation now that government actually is there to bail us out. We have to reset expectations around what the role of government is, and then elect people who are going to enact what we believe the role is.
Yeah, I could not agree more. It's probably the smartest thing you've said. I mean, you've wasted the smartest thing you've ever going to say in the opening video podcast. What are you going to do? It's all downhill.
I'm still hurt from a couple of weeks ago.
Which one?
Where you said you'd given 120,000 haircuts, and I was probably in the top 3 of intelligent people that you've given a haircut to, top 3.
Yeah.
And then you couldn't even name the other 2. And I'm not even sure if I was number 2
I
or
did
3
because I said Disquarius. So I said Disquarius. And that's why I did say top 2 or 3. No, I laid out why.
I was hurt, Dave.
Really?
I've got feelings.
Oh, no, you don't. Since when do you have feelings?
So,
back accountants have feelings.
Yes.
Are you being serious here?
Yes, Dave.
So all our accountant listeners, I now know you actually have feelings. I thought you were just about the pure bottom line.
No, not at all. Not at all. There's a socialist in me.
You know, Tony, you'll make more money if you get rid of the staff.
Well, who was that?
You don't know Christopher Walken?
Oh, Christopher Walken.
What's wrong with you?
You know what we need in the studio?
What?
Oh, we need more fucking cowbell.
Oh, definitely. Ding, 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 ding. You definitely never have enough cowbell.
So, where were we dribbling on it? We were talking about the fact is we need to
change the culture.
Yeah, that's right. But where did it come from, Dave? Because like more recently, people will say that there's a whole generation of people, Gen Zs, millennials, whoever they are, that are entitled. There's an expectation that society/economy/ whoever's going to serve some stuff up for them to make their life easier. Right?
See me as an actor/model and not the other way around. So slashing. Zoolander.
That's right. There's an expectation that's going to happen, correct? So where did that come from? But it seems like it's a bigger thing. Like,
well, politics is downstream from culture, and I want to do a whole episode because you've made an argument. Well, you didn't really make the argument. You made a comment about you're talking about it was why Dutton lost, and there was a various reasons. But you said they were banging on too much about the culture wars. And one of the things I want to dive into is that politics is culture. Politics is downstream from culture. So I think why we got to that is because the culture shift of how we raise people and how we view the family, how we view society, how we view ourselves in it got so soft, right? And I'm a big believer in that saying, strong men make good times make weak men make hard times make strong men. And when you look at where we are as a society, 1945 is really sort of the, for an arbitrary date, but that's about the real end of the tough times. Now, I know I'm not saying, right on the end of the war, everything was rosy. I know 5, 10, 15, 20 years after, there was still tough times. The rationing still went on and so on and so forth. But the point I'm making is, where's the generation that's seen anything tough? I'm the last generation in this country that's had grandparents that fought in the Second World War for this country. So what we've really seen is we've seen everything's only got better. So when people talk about, say, COVID, and they say things were tough in COVID, it's like, well, really, you streamed Netflix, you had your food delivered, you worked from home, or if you weren't working, you got the government payment. Where to my grandparents, the issues were, go and get your uniform, son, get your 303 rifle, aim it at that guy that you might have enjoyed having a beer with any other time. And by the way, wifey, you might not find out he's dead for 2 years. So what we consider tough has just moved so far to the soft level. So for me, it's everything from not keeping score in sports, from not marking with red pen, taking the strap away, not letting the police give you a kick in the ass. We did all these things, and I'll defend people that they did it from the heart, because most people, unless you're far left or far right, most people make decisions from the heart. But, as Orwell wrote, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So you go back to all these things that we said, oh, you put them in the naughty corner. You don't hit kids. Oh, don't give them the strap in school. Our police shouldn't be giving people a kick in the butt. And what we created is we created a soft generation. And if you've got someone soft, they don't want to work themselves. They don't want to achieve themselves. They don't have the skills to do it. Where what you're meant to do is, the psychological technical term is the zone of proximal development. So what that means is, when you're raising your kids, and you say to them, you don't say set the table, because they don't know what it means. You'll say, put the knife and the fork on the table. And then when they know where the knife and fork go, okay, make sure you put the sauce, make sure you put the salt and pepper. And after all these little things they learn along the way, one day you just say set the table, and they know it means you put the napkins, you put the sauce, where the spoon goes, the fork goes. So all these things, they're not just about learning skills, but that development's about the toughness, the resilience, the stoicism, the ability to achieve on your own without having to rely on someone else. And again, to a level. because I don't believe in the term self-made man either, right? Because somewhere along that line, you had a good woman behind you. Somewhere you had a mentor. Someone helped you out. But the point I'm making is we created such a soft society that as soon as something goes wrong, they're turning to the superhero to come and save them.
Being?
The government.
Yep.
Which is not much of a superhero.
But so where do we go, Dave?
If the government was a superhero, what superhero would it be? Be Jabba the Hutt. Wouldn't be a superhero.
Pizza the Hut from Spaceballs. From Spaceballs.
I love that movie, Spaceballs. I love these oversized Darth Vader helmet. We're showing our age now.
So I don't see anything changing again, Dave. A lot of these problems that we talk about, they're going to take like decades to unwind, right? And I don't actually, and because the nature of politics and government and policy is so short term, I don't see it changing in a hurry. But how does, because you're a smart guy, Dave.
It's been alleged.
I'm looking
but
right
not
at the
been
camera.
proven.
Dave's smart.
I'm looking right at the camera. It's not been proven.
Talk to me about our mate up in Beijing and how they're structured, because there's no socializing of losses there.
Well, technically, yes. Technically, yes. Not to the same way, but that the socializers of the losses there would be the lack of providing basic needs, because the money's not there. So your water probably stops running. Your power's not on.
Yep.
So it does happen. In fact, it happens more in communism than it does in democracy.
But there are some things we've spoken about tonight where, so you spoke about earlier, private-public partnership. Let's go build a 4-lane, 2-lane either way, M2, connecting the northern suburbs across the top of Sydney. Fine, fantastic. And let's only build it 2 lanes each way. Oh, but right now, you're going to need 6 each way at some point. No, 2 will do for now.
Yeah.
What would the Chinese do?
Oh, the Chinese would actually go, we need 6. All right, do it 12 each way.
And then
but there's a green frog that lives on the peripheral thing. I'd just crush it. And there's an old guy there that he's been making bricks for the last 50 years, and his house is right in the middle of lane 5. Move him.
So now, I'm suggesting we go a little bit to that approach in some of the decisions we need to make.
Well, to a level we do. Now, that doesn't mean I want to see, what they say, they put up a parking lot. What's that song? But anyway,
Today's Paradise.
Yeah,
Joni Mitchell.
That's it. So I don't want a situation where we degrade the wilderness and we just turn around and do whatever. But I also don't want a situation that we are in a stage where one person can hold pieces of infrastructure up for an inordinate amount of time. And it shouldn't be happening at some point. And this is where I've mentioned to you, I want to do a whole nation building series of, okay, if the Centre for Population out of Treasury is predicting another 13.5 million people, which is 50% growth in the next 40 years.
Hang on, leave the numbers to me, champ.
So I should do, but I actually know this number. And it's actually very much Leith Van Onselen, who I credit for my education on all things Australian population growth. Leith, looking forward to having you on, hopefully. As he says, that's another Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, that you need to replicate all the infrastructure and the housing in just 40 years. That is absolutely ginormous. So even that, right, even that growth model, there's an element there you say, well, who's going to benefit from the growth and who's going to lose out? So the private's going to benefit and our quality of life is going to decline.
But Dave, this gets back to...
So that's a socialised loss.
But why do Western countries, and the US are masters at this, why do Western countries continually push population growth?
I think it's lazy economics.
Yeah, and so let's explore that. GDP.
Correct.
Right.
Because that's their only metric.
So more people spending more, right?
I'm a good leader.
Generating more jobs somehow.
Yeah.
The pie's getting... Everyone's share of the pie is getting smaller.
Yep.
Correct?
And actually, I'll give you an example of that. This permeates from the top to the bottom, right? Because this is, I'm not pointing fingers here at who should be the leaders and they're the dumbasses, even though they are. This goes right down to the small business level. I'll use my field, one of my fields, in barbering, right? When you see the $20, $10 haircut, and they think these guys, notwithstanding all sorts of allegations of money laundering, like let's say you've got a genuine barbershop doing his $20 haircuts. They're dumbasses. And they're dumbasses because if you take a volume-based model to something that requires a human to do, you're a moron. Because if you think that, for example, let's say you're selling Coca-Cola and your machine produces 1,000 cans a minute, and you can invest in a new machine that will produce 2,000 cans a minute, and you go, you know what? If I invest in that machine, I can sell double. I'll reduce the cost because I'll become a volume-based business, and I'll just make a cent a can, and this is what I'll do. When you've got to stand there, you're using your shoulders, your back, you're on your feet. All right, you might be 25 years of age, 30 years of age now. You're going to burn yourself out. For what? To be providing a service cheaper and cheaper and cheaper that's human. So this thinking is, the rot is all the way through our culture, where once upon a time that wasn't. Once upon a time you could argue that, notwithstanding the nation builder type of politician, of which there's very few Lee Kuan Yew types, private sector used to attract some smart brains, whether it was the local butcher or whether it was the guy that had a factory with 5,000 workers. We've got people now that are going into business that don't even understand that they're working for less money than what they could get going and delivering for Woolworths, and they're destroying their body over 20 or 30 years to do cheaper and cheaper services. It's like you're not a product, you're not a machine.
But Dave,
so this type of thinking is what we've now got in the modern world.
But like my point earlier around, we let too many businesses continue to exist that aren't delivering the required return, but these
too many zombie businesses,
and we just kept shoveling this down people's throats. There needs to be a clean out. You want our economy to have the right number of services being delivered by at the required quality and standard. And that's transport, that's health, that's education, that's everything, right? You want that delivered, but there seems to be an oversupply of products and services where everyone's getting squeezed and margins are getting squeezed, right? Now, if compare that comment to the building industry where we can't find enough tradies. Right?
Correct. We're getting squeezed in the wrong areas.
So it's in that space, how should the market solve for the lack of tradies?
Well, I think what's starting to happen is, I was reading something today on the data that, notwithstanding 2024, since 2017, domestic student enrollments are declining. So the market is adjusting, but slowly, because it's still, you're swimming against the current. So what's happening is more and more stories are coming out from students that owe $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 for a bachelor of hop on one leg and stand on, my right leg. So they're starting to work out, I owe money and I've got no job prospects, and the job prospects I have don't pay enough for me to facilitate that debt. People starting to hear now of the tradie that's got, riding off his ute, has all this and still making $150,000, $200,000 after writing off all what he has. So the market will adjust in terms of the incentives are becoming obvious as far as wages. However, we've still got a government that's so stupid that it's nearly like inverse of how you run an economy. It's turning around and wanting this whole professional class to sit up here while the wheels of the economy are rusting away because they're not creating the electrician, they're not creating the plumber, you don't have enough truck drivers. All the things that actually make things run are starting to rot. And the people that are still in that area, they're making a mozza. So this is where government regulation, getting back to our how to fix the higher education episode, the government should be turning around and actually capping university places again. And that's the first thing. So that way they're just putting up the guardrails in the market, but then let people choose. Do I want to be an electrician? Do I want to be a plumber? Do I want to be a baker? Do I want to drive a truck? Whatever it is.
But Dave, I get it.
Because that's another aspect of socialising the stuff up, right? We're all paying for the lack of services.
But I think that's a practical approach to that problem. But I say it's free market. If Sydney Uni wants to charge $120,000 for a 3-year degree on hopping on one leg while you rub your stomach and pat your head for 3 years, and someone can afford it, I can't. But good luck to them.
I don't want to stop the university offering it. I want to stop the Commonwealth support, the taxpayer subsidising.
No, I agree. I actually think that courses should be subsidised, or the contribution the government makes to the completion of undergrad courses should be based on some quantitative assessment on what value that's going to bring to our economy for the next 30, 40 years.
And I also want to stop universities from early offers, because I want to stop them going into year 11, 16, 17-year-olds and enticing them into debt, because that's what you're getting.
Dave, all I want is for either my 13-year or 11-year-old sons, only one of them, to be at some stage branded gifted and talented.
Oh, they are gifted and talented, Tony. They are very gifted and talented. They're your sons.
I want them
born
to be
with it.
Gifted and talented.
This is part of the problem too, right? Because that's what we do. We tell everyone they're special.
My boys are special, Dave.
You know how few special people there are, and I'm not talking.
They're on the cusp of being
gifted
and
talented. I don't mean in the sense of we call people special because they're mentally challenged, but there's very few people that are Einstein. There's very few people that will drive humanity forward in a giant leap through some type of innovation or forward thinking. Now, that being said, I don't want to curtail them either, because one thing people don't want to accept is we are driven forward by the dissenters, right? The people that turn around and go, no, it's not flat. It's not flat. I'll prove to you it's not flat, right? And we ridicule them. So we do, we've got to stop telling all our kids they're special and start telling them, no, you've got a good life. You've got an opportunity before you. You're young, you're healthy, you have all these options. I'm not expecting you to make a choice at 17, 18 and you got it right and that's what you do for the rest of your life. But we've got to stop turning around and incentivizing the wrong things and entrapping them into the wrong things as well. It's one thing to make bad choices on an individual level and have to wear that. It's another thing that we sort of set them up for failure.
Which is what we're doing, Dave.
It is what we're doing.
With the cost of education.
On our list of episodes, I've got one called Are Universities Selling Shovels? Now, what that comes from is I read an investment piece once that said,
I want a T-shirt that says that.
I'll get you a T-shirt that says that. We've got to do a whole bunch of merch for the podcast anyway. I want one that says 0 fucks given as well. R2BW, 0 fucks given. But in the gold rush, the people that got rich weren't those that found gold. It was those that sold the shovels. And universities are selling shovels. They're selling dreams to people, and most people just have a job. Most aren't going to get rich. Most aren't going to have a career. So career is the most overused word in corporate at the moment. Most people don't have careers. You have a job. You go and do a job. You might like it, but you're trading off your time for the income. The boss might like you. You like them. But for the most part, it's just purely transactional. This concept of career, there's very few people that have careers.
Unless you're called Tony and Dave.
Well, is this a career? I'd like to think it's a career, but I don't think it's a career. So I think this is just me. All I've done is taken the bullshit to the barbershop and I've just put it into a microphone.
How good. How good.
I'm getting paid to talk twice.
So how come all the topics we speak about, Dave, there always seem to be big problems we're trying to solve, we're trying to talk, and it's almost generational fixes.
It's generational fix, and it's
multifaceted. Like there's so many levers that need to get pulled at the same time. And to be quite honest, I've got no confidence in Western government to be able to come up with a coherent set of policies that address 3 of them, let alone the 15 they need to fix.
We don't. You tell me the last nation builder you've seen in Western society. Someone that's turned around and said, okay, here's where we're at. Here's what's going on. So, for example, either one of two things, right? So by nation builder, I mean either like a Lee Kuan Yew, so you're a burgeoning nation out of independence and, the infrastructure just basically doesn't exist. So you've got to establish the framework of government and then business and so on and so forth. Or the 2 other options, which are kind of nearly the different side of the same coin. One is like we're heading into a 4th industrial revolution, so AI and machine learning and what's going on. So we now know that, okay, the way we've been doing it is not the way it's going to be. And we need to get ahead of the curve before we fall behind our competitors, that being other nation states. Or, as Australia's doing, you're saying, okay, we're making a change that we think our nation state needs to have this unbelievable explosion in growth because we think 27 million people is not enough here. We're going to 40. So in those 3 things, who have you seen in Western society, you could say, as a leader, has had the ability to actually nation build?
I can't think of any, right?
None.
I'm just thinking like, and this would be more than one. Obviously, this would be like a multi-governments on either side, but post-Vietnam War, Vietnam, right?
Yeah. And even then, that was Ho Chi Minh. It was communism anyway.
That's what I mean. So, and then I look at, but why have we let ourselves down that path, Dave?
Well, I think,
No, so
again, I think it's cultural.
maybe because it's politics.
Yeah.
They're right.
Well, politics
That's what I
downstream
mean.
from culture.
Because short-termism, right? Wanting to get re-elected, right? Path of least resistance. We're not thinking about, so what is it, Dave, about Western democracies that can't see beyond 5 to 6 years?
I just think we've just had it too good, really. Because, like, look at the US, and it gets back to that JFK. Don't ask what your country can do for you.
Oh, that is
Ask
that.
what you can do for your country.
Can you do that with a Donny voice?
Don't ask what your country can do for you. That's what you can do for your country. But that's the question, right? When's the last time someone asked that? When was the last time people thought like that? It doesn't happen anymore. Everything, it's the hyper individualism.
But where's that born out of?
Well, I think for us, if I'd say here we're downstream from the US here.
Exactly.
This is where we've gone more from being British to being American. Because whilst I'm very much about the individual, I think the US take it to the absolute nth degree. It's hyper individual.
Where it becomes,
if you ain't first,
you're last. And screw everyone. I just got hit by a bus. Ambulance comes across and says, "Can I have your PIN number, please, on the credit card?"
Yeah. And that to me is a very big problem. So I think, we're not going to solve this issue. Let's hypothetically speaking say Australia that magically got this unbelievable nation builder that turns up in the Liberal Party or the Labor Party, wherever. It's going to take 20, 30, 40 years. You and I'll probably be dead because I'll be too fat and I'll die of diabetes, or as the Filipinos say, the diabetes.
I'll be driving my AUKUS submarine on the 12-lane each way M2, which goes all the way to Orange.
Are you going to be a captain of a submarine?
Yes.
Do you know they had they couldn't get enough submariners here, so they were paying like $50,000 bonuses. We had cooks, submariner cooks that run like 160, 180 grand a year because no one wants to be a submariner.
Just one more Donny impersonation before we wrap up tonight.
Well,
just give me a Donny talking to Albo, trying to squeeze Albo for some more money on AUKUS.
Well, I can see that you've ordered submarines, but they're not coming for quite some time. I won't be the president anymore. Mr. President, I'm trying to fix things, but unfortunately we only have 3-year terms in Australia, and unless I can last 33, I don't think I'll be able to give you a ride in the submarine. Well, why am I talking to you? I've already spoken to your man, Mr. K-Rod. I don't like him very much. He's a bad guy. I don't think I want to be with Australia anymore. Let's kill AUKUS.
I love it. That could be the conversation, right?
That would be the conversation. Actually, I was thinking about when you said what would it be like if the Don went to hell. I got home and I thought, you know what? I could imagine him getting down there. Oh, wow. Bill, Hillary, it's good to see you. I think all the people that would be down there. Epstein's down here.
We've got to unravel that. Come on, Dave.
Oh, that's a whole nother episode.
I know. So, Dave, what are the key takeouts?
We're screwed. No, the first thing is I think we need to start from our younger generation. I saw the other day they want to start putting civics back into teaching in school. I think that's a good start, number one. So I think first and foremost we need to start raising our kids with a completely different attitude to their responsibilities as much as their opportunities. We need to collectively stop acting like children and think every time something goes wrong, the government is there for us. We need to start a genuine conversation, and people need to be aware, because most people aren't aware of what that growth projection is out of Treasury, or Sanford population, which sits in Treasury. And we need to start saying, well, at the moment, our infrastructure is crush loaded. So, if we're going to have this growth, how about we pause until we first and foremost catch up with the needed infrastructure? B, we start to work out, well, on those numbers, how many truck drivers, plumbers, barbers, everything are we going to need? And then C, bipartisan support. So don't play politics on it. Like, I get it, there's always going to be some, but let's get back to the politics of, again, we agree on the destination. The politicking you're doing is that you would take a different journey, right? So let's at least agree and say, okay, we admit, and that this is not a Liberal problem, this is not a Labor problem, this has been an everyone problem for the last 30 years. Let's admit that it's been wrong. Let's get an adult agreement of what it looks like in terms of where we're going on these numbers. And let's start to actually drive Australia forward so that we don't just throw away our quality of life and our standard of living on just the concept of, but we'll just have 40 million people in this lazy economic model that drives GDP.
That is Dave's campaign announcement for the 2028, is it? 2028 election?
It would be 2028.
Dave is going to run for Prime Minister.
I'm running as an independent.
I will be his chief of staff. So I handle all his stuff.
You can be my chief of staff.
And that'll be the platform that we run on.
And then Russian Queen will be my secretary. She'll be my Marilyn. She'll be my Marilyn Monroe.
And then the boys can be your security detail.
Oh, without doubt. Because it'd be just like the Don. I'd be towering over them when they get shot in the head anyway.
Yeah. So as always, Dave, we come from different points of view, but the whole purpose of the conversation is
to prove that I'm always right.
No, to educate ourselves.
It's no education.
For me to be lectured regularly by Dave.
Being
30, and my goal is to get to number 2 on the 120,000 list of people who Dave's cut their hair. I want to get to the top 2.
Yeah, no, I said you were in the top 2 or 3. I said it's yonder squares.
You said 2 or 3, man. That hurts.
Well, it depends on how you define it too. If you want pure intellect, there's been some absolutely brilliant people, but would I trust them to talk about anything other than their narrow field? And can they? Here's something else. Working at the University of Sydney, this is something I really learnt. There's very few people that can have an area of expertise and, whether it's 6 months, 12 months, 10 years, whatever, go, actually, I was wrong. And to me, that's actually when you start to realize that you're a genuine adult is when you can admit that a position you hold can be wrong.
I agree. Absolutely. So the goal I want to share this with our viewers now, Dave. The goal for Dave and I is inside 3 years to host this podcast at the Catalina Wine Mixer.
Oh, it's got to be the Catalina Wine Mixer.
As always, Dave.
I've got to make bank.
What do we say?
You have a right to be wrong.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and we hope you enjoyed it. Like us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.